Hey guys, tonight we embark on a journey back in time to an era when the clinking of horns and the roar of laughter echoed through smoky halls. An age where getting drunk wasn't just a pastime, but a way of life, a spiritual experience, and, sometimes, a matter of survival. Imagine, if you will, the biting chill of the North Atlantic wind, the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, and the deep thrum of a lyre. You're not just listening to a story, you're there, feeling the rough-hewn timber beneath your fingers, the warmth of the fire on your face. This isn't your average Friday night pub crawl. This is the Viking Age, and trust me, you probably won't survive this without a serious case of historical indigestion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push aside the heavy hide flap, and the cacophony of the mead hall washes over you. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke roasting meat, and something sweet and intoxicating mead. This isn't just a building, it's the beating heart of the Viking community, a place where alliances are forged, sagas are sung, and reputations are made or broken. You see warriors, their faces scarred by battle and softened by drink, their voices booming as they recount tales of daring raids and epic journeys. Women, their braids adorned with silver, move gracefully among the benches, refilling horns and sharing hushed conversations. Children, surprisingly, are also present, darting between legs, their laughter adding to the joyous din. This is the mead hall, and it's far more than just a place to get a drink. It's a political arena, a social hub, and a spiritual sanctuary, all rolled into one. The concept of the mead hall, or skáli as it was known in Old Norse, was central to early Germanic and Norse societies. These grand halls, often the largest buildings in a settlement, served as the primary gathering place for chieftains and their retinues. Here, loyalty was sworn, disputes were settled, and the bonds of kinship and community were strengthened through shared feasts and, of course, shared drink. It was a place of immense social significance, where one's standing could be elevated or diminished with a single toast or a poorly chosen word. The very architecture of these halls, with their central hearths and long benches, was designed to foster a sense of communal warmth and shared experience. Historians still argue whether the layout of these halls was primarily for practical purposes, like heating and ventilation, or if it held deeper symbolic meaning, representing the cosmic order of their world. One quirky tidbit about these mead halls is that they weren't always permanent structures. While some were grand timber-built edifices that stood for generations, others were more temporary, erected for specific events like large feasts or seasonal gatherings. Imagine the effort involved in building a temporary party venue for hundreds of people just to tear it down a few weeks later. It speaks volumes about the importance they placed on these communal drinking events. You might even find yourself wondering if they had a Viking equivalent of a party planner, meticulously organizing the logistics of these massive, boozy get-togethers. Probably not, but a man can dream, right? The sheer scale of some of these feasts, with hundreds of attendees, would have required an incredible amount of coordination, from brewing vast quantities of mead and ale to preparing enough food to feed an army. It makes your last potluck seem like a quiet cup of tea, as you settle onto a bench. A heavy drinking horn, perhaps carved from an aurochs, is passed your way. The mead inside shimmers, a golden invitation to forget your troubles and embrace the moment. You take a deep draught, the sweet, fermented honey warming you from the inside out. This isn't just any drink. It's a symbol of hospitality, a bond between host and guest, and a conduit to the gods themselves. The Vikings believed that mead had divine origins, a gift from the gods, and drinking it was a way to connect with the spiritual realm. It was said that Odin himself drank only mead, and that the mead of poetry gave a seer's blood, bestowed wisdom and poetic skill upon those who partook. So, as you drink, you're not just getting tipsy. You're potentially communing with the divine, or at least hoping for a sudden burst of poetic inspiration that might impress the chieftain. Mainstream historical fact. Archaeological evidence, including the discovery of large halls and drinking vessels, confirms the central role of feasting and drinking in Viking society. Sites like Leia in Denmark have revealed the remains of massive mead halls, some over 50 meters long, indicating their importance as centers of power and community. These discoveries align with literary sources like Beowulf, which vividly describe the grandeur and significance of mead halls in Germanic heroic culture. It wasn't just a casual gathering. It was a fundamental aspect of their social and political structure. Another quirky tidbit: while mead was undoubtedly popular, the Vikings also drank a significant amount of ale and beer. Mead was often reserved for special occasions or for the elite, while ale was the everyday beverage, brewed from barley, oats, or rye. Imagine the sheer volume of grain needed to keep these halls supplied. It suggests a highly organized agricultural system to support such a thirsty population. And speaking of thirsty, you might notice that there are no designated drivers in this era. Everyone's in it together, which probably explains why so many sagas involve epic journeys that end with someone falling into a ditch. Good times, right? Historians still argue whether the Vikings practiced moderation in their drinking or if their feasts were consistently characterized by excessive consumption. While some sagas depict scenes of heroic drinking and revelry, others suggest a more measured approach, emphasizing the importance of hospitality and social order. It's a bit like trying to figure out if your great-grandparents were party animals or quiet tea drinkers, based solely on their holiday photos. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in the middle, depending on the occasion, the host, and the individual's capacity for holding their liquor. But one thing is for sure: the mead hall was where the magic happened, where stories were born, and where the echoes of laughter and song would linger long after the last horn was drained. After that whirlwind introduction to the mead hall, you might be wondering, just how did they conjure up such potent potables? How did these ancient Norsemen transform humble honey and grain into the liquid courage that fueled their feasts, their sagas, and perhaps a few questionable decisions? Well, pull up a stool, because we're about to dive into the fascinating, and sometimes surprisingly simple, world of Viking brewing. It wasn't exactly rocket science, but it certainly required a keen eye, a strong back, and a healthy dose of patience. Let's start with mead, that golden nectar you just sampled. At its core, mead is deceptively simple: fermented honey and water. But the Vikings, ever resourceful, elevated this basic recipe into something truly special. Imagine you're standing beside a large, wooden vat, the air thick with the sweet, floral scent of honey. You watch as a Viking brewer, perhaps a wise old woman with hands stained from years of work, carefully mixes raw, unfiltered honey with fresh water. This isn't just any water. It's often drawn from pure springs or collected rainwater, free from the chlorine and fluoride we're so accustomed to. They understood, perhaps instinctively, that good water makes good mead. You might even see her adding various herbs, spices, or fruits, perhaps wild berries, fragrant heather, or even a handful of hops, though hops were less common in early Viking mead than in their ales. These additions weren't just for flavor. They often had medicinal properties or were believed to enhance the mead's magical qualities. It's like a primitive, boozy smoothie, but with far more historical gravitas. The real magic, of course, happened during fermentation. Without modern laboratory yeasts, the Vikings relied on wild yeasts present in the honey itself, in the air, or on the surfaces of their brewing vessels. Think about that for a moment. They were essentially trusting invisible microorganisms to do all the hard work. It's a bit like baking sourdough before anyone knew what sourdough was. They might have used a starter from a previous successful batch, a practice that continued for centuries in farmhouse brewing traditions. This would have been a thick, yeasty residue, carefully preserved and cherished, passed down through generations like a family heirloom. Imagine the pressure of being the one responsible for keeping the family yeast alive. One wrong move, and you'd be responsible for a very sober, and likely very grumpy, mead hall. Mainstream historical fact: while specific written recipes from the Viking Age are scarce, archaeological findings and later Norse sagas provide strong evidence of widespread mead and ale production. Residues found in ancient drinking vessels and burial mounds confirmed the presence of fermented beverages made from honey, barley, and various botanicals. This indicates a sophisticated understanding of fermentation processes, even without the scientific knowledge we possess today. They knew what worked, and they stuck with it, often through trial and error over centuries. Now, let's talk about ale. While mead was often seen as a drink for special occasions or the elite, ale was the everyday beverage, the workhorse of Viking hydration. You'd find it brewed from barley, oats, or rye, depending on what was readily available. The process involved malting the grains, essentially allowing them to sprout slightly to convert starches into fermentable sugars, then drying them. This malting process would have been done in kilns, often smoky and pungent, giving the ale a distinct earthy flavor. Then, the malted grains would be mashed with hot water, creating a sweet liquid called wort. This wort was then boiled, and sometimes herbs like bog myrtle, yarrow, or even juniper berries were added for flavor and preservation. Unlike modern beer, hops were not universally used in Viking ale, especially in earlier periods. So, if you're imagining a crisp, hoppy IPA, you're way off. Think more along the Linosoph, a rustic, slightly sweet, and probably quite cloudy brew. It was less about clarity and more about getting the job done, if you catch my drift. One quirky tidbit about Viking brewing is the role of women. Brewing was primarily a domestic task, often overseen by the mistress of the household. These women were not just homemakers, they were skilled artisans, responsible for ensuring a steady supply of ale for their families and guests. They were the original craft brewers, perfecting their recipes through generations of practice. In some cases, their brewing prowess could even enhance their social standing. Imagine being known throughout the village for having the best ale. That's serious bragging rights in the Viking Age. It also meant that women held significant economic power within the household, controlling a vital resource. So, next time you enjoy a cold one, Raise a glass to the Viking women who paved the way. Historians still argue whether the Vikings intentionally cultivated specific yeast strains, or if their brewing success was largely due to serendipitous wild fermentation. While modern brewers meticulously control their yeast, the Vikings likely relied on what was naturally present, perhaps unknowingly selecting for certain strains by reusing vessels or starters. Some scholars suggest that certain brewing traditions, passed down orally, might have inadvertently led to the propagation of desirable yeast cultures. Others contend that the variations in their brews were simply accepted as part of the natural process, with each batch having its own unique character. It's a bit like asking if your great-grandma's secret ingredient was intentional or just a happy accident. The result, however, was consistently intoxicating, which, let's be honest, was probably the main goal. The brewing process was also deeply intertwined with the seasons and the agricultural cycle. The harvest of grains and the collection of honey dictated when and how much could be brewed. Large-scale brewing for feasts would have been a communal effort, with everyone pitching in to ensure the vats were full. It was a time of shared labor, anticipation, and ultimately celebration. The aroma of fermenting grains and honey would have been a familiar and comforting smell in Viking settlements, a promise of warmth, camaraderie, and perhaps a little bit of mischief to come. So, the next time you crack open a cold one, spare a thought for the ancient brewers, toiling away in their smoky halls, creating the golden nectar that fueled an entire civilization. Now that you've had a taste of how the Vikings brewed their potent concoctions, let's shift our focus from the production line to the consumption zone. While the mead hall was undoubtedly the grand stage for major feasts and political gatherings, what about the everyday drinking? Where did the average Viking go for a casual pint, a bit of gossip, or to escape the nagging of their spouse? Well, you might be surprised to learn that the concept of a public drinking establishment, while not identical to our modern pubs or taverns, certainly existed in the Viking Age, albeit in a more fluid and community-centric form. Think less neon signs and sticky floors, and more communal hearths and shared stories, unlike the dedicated, purpose-built taverns of later medieval Europe. Viking drinking often revolved around the home, or more specifically, the larger, more prominent homes within a settlement. These weren't strictly alehouses in the commercial sense, but rather the residences of chieftains, wealthy farmers, or influential families who had the resources to brew in quantity and the social standing to host. Imagine walking into a bustling farmstead, the air filled with the aroma of simmering stews and freshly brewed ale. You'd find a central hall, much like a smaller version of the grand mead halls, where locals would gather. It was a place for trade, for news, for matchmaking, and of course, for drinking. These informal gathering spots served as the social media of their time, a place where information, rumors, and sagas spread faster than a winter plague. If you wanted to know what was happening in the next fjord over, you didn't check your phone. You went to the local brewhouse and listened to the chatter. Mainstream historical fact: while archaeological evidence for dedicated public taverns in the Viking Age is limited, historical and literary sources suggest that large households and communal halls served as de facto social centers where alcohol was consumed. These spaces facilitated social bonding, political discourse, and the exchange of goods and information, much like modern pubs or community centers. The emphasis was on hospitality and community, with the host often providing the drink as a sign of generosity and status. One quirky tidbit is that these informal alehouses weren't just for drinking. They were often multifunctional spaces. You might find a blacksmith working in one corner, a weaver in another, and a storyteller captivating a small crowd by the fire. It was a true hub of activity, a place where the lines between work, social life, and entertainment were beautifully blurred. Imagine trying to have a quiet drink while someone's hammering out a sword in the background. It certainly adds a certain ambience. And unlike today, where you might have to pay for your drink, in many of these settings, the ale was often provided by the host as part of the communal gathering. Your payment was your presence, your stories, and your contribution to the collective merriment. It was a different kind of economy, one built on reciprocity and social obligation. Historians still argue whether the concept of a commercial tavern, where one paid for drinks, existed in the Viking Age, or if such establishments only emerged later in the medieval period. Some scholars point to the existence of specific terms for innkeepers or ale sellers in later Norse texts, suggesting a nascent commercial trade in alcohol. Others argue that the strong emphasis on hospitality and gift-giving in Viking society would have made a purely commercial drinking establishment less common, with most alcohol consumed in private homes or communal halls as part of a larger social exchange. It's a bit like debating whether your local coffee shop is a business or just a really well-organized community center. The truth is likely a blend, with different practices in different regions and at different times. So, you're in one of these bustling Viking social hubs. The air is thick with the aroma of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the ever-present scent of ale. You're surrounded by people from all walks of life, farmers discussing the harvest, warriors boasting of their latest exploits, and traders haggling over prices. The conversations are loud, boisterous, and often punctuated by hearty laughter. You might even witness a spontaneous poetry recitation or a wrestling match break out in the corner. It's a lively, unfiltered experience, far removed from the sanitized, curated environments of many modern bars. There's no background music, just the raw, vibrant soundtrack of human connection. And unlike today, where you might spend an hour scrolling through your phone, here, your entertainment is the people around you. You're forced to engage, to listen, to tell your own stories. It's a refreshing change, isn't it? Though, perhaps a little overwhelming if you're used to your quiet corner booth. Imagine the sheer volume of liquid consumed in these places. With ale being a staple, and often safer to drink than water, it was consumed throughout the day, not just in the evenings. You might start your day with a light ale, have another with lunch, and then settle in for a serious session in the evening. It was a constant flow, a liquid thread weaving through the fabric of daily life. And because the alcohol content was generally lower than modern beers, you could drink more of it without immediately falling off your bench. Though, as you'll soon discover, that didn't stop them from getting spectacularly drunk. It just took a little more dedication, a little more commitment to the cause. It's like the difference between sipping a fine wine and chugging a light beer. Both get you there, just at different speeds. Another light joke, you know. They say Vikings were fierce warriors, but I bet their biggest battles were often fought not on the battlefield, but against the urge to take a nap in the middle of a feast. Imagine trying to raid a monastery with a splitting headache and a serious case of the spins. Not exactly optimal battle conditions, are they? Perhaps that's why they were so good at surprising their enemies. No one expected a Viking invasion at 3 a.m. after a night of heavy drinking. Or maybe they just had a higher tolerance for discomfort. Either way, it makes for a good story. These social gatherings weren't just about getting drunk. They were crucial for community cohesion. In a world without formal institutions like police forces or complex legal systems, social bonds were paramount. Drinking together, sharing stories, and participating in communal rituals reinforced trust and loyalty. If you drank with someone, you were essentially vouching for them, and they for you. It was a powerful form of social currency, more valuable than any silver or gold. A shared horn of mead could seal a deal, mend a feud, or even forge a new alliance. It was a liquid handshake, a binding agreement that transcended mere words, and woe betide anyone who broke that bond. The social consequences could be severe, far worse than a mere hangover. So, as you sit there, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the camaraderie of your fellow Vikings, you realize that these ale houses, these informal gathering spots, were the true heart of their social world. They were places of laughter, of tears, of boasts, and of quiet contemplation. They were where life happened, unfiltered and raw. And as the night deepens and the horns continue to circulate, you feel a sense of belonging, a connection to this ancient world that transcends time. It's a feeling that no modern pub, no matter how cozy, can quite replicate. Because here, in the flickering light of the hearth, you're not just a patron. You're part of the saga, a character in the ongoing story of what getting drunk was. Like in the age of Vikings, having explored the bustling, informal alehouses of the Viking Age, you've witnessed how deeply integrated drinking was into their daily social fabric. But now, let's step into a more formal, and perhaps more perilous, aspect of Viking drinking culture, the drinking horn ceremony. This wasn't just about getting a buzz. It was a ritual steeped in tradition, where every sip, every word, and every gesture carried immense weight. Your fate, your honor, and even your life could hang in the balance, all within the confines of a single passed horn. Imagine the scene. The mead hall, perhaps the same one you entered earlier, is now hushed. The usual boisterous chatter replaced by an expectant silence. The chieftain, or a designated host, stands at the head of the table, holding aloft a magnificent drinking horn, perhaps adorned with silver bands or intricate carvings. This isn't just any horn. It's a vessel of power, a conduit for oaths and boasts. The ceremony, known as a sumbel or brogafell, is about to begin. You feel a prickle of anticipation, a nervous flutter in your stomach. This isn't a casual toast. This is serious business, a sacred act that binds individuals and communities. It's like a corporate board meeting, a wedding, and a high poker game all rolled into one. But with far more mead and potentially fatal consequences. Mainstream historical fact: drinking horn ceremonies, particularly the sumbel, were central to Viking and Germanic social and political life. These rituals involved formal toasts, boasts, and oath-taking, often performed in a specific order, with the drinking horn passed around the assembly. These ceremonies served to reinforce social hierarchies, solidify alliances, and publicly declare intentions or achievements. They were not merely social gatherings, but crucial events for maintaining social order and demonstrating loyalty. As the horn is passed to you, you notice the eyes of everyone in the hall upon you. This is your moment. To speak, to make a boast brager, or to swear an oath. Your words must be carefully chosen, for once spoken, they are binding. A boast might be a declaration of a heroic deed you've accomplished, or a promise of a great feat you intend to perform. An oath could be a pledge of loyalty to your chieftain, a vow to avenge a fallen comrade, or a commitment to a future action. The pressure is immense. You can't just mumble something about how good the mead is. This is your reputation on the line. It's like being called upon to give an impromptu speech at a family gathering. But instead of just embarrassing yourself, you could accidentally commit to fighting a dragon. No pressure, right? One quirky tidbit about these ceremonies is the concept of Thebragafel, or the boskapat. This was a special toast, often the first of the ceremony, dedicated to a god, usually Odin, or to a deceased chieftain. It was a moment of high drama, where the most important boasts and oaths were made. Imagine the tension in the air as the chieftain raises the horn, his voice booming through the hall, as he pledges to conquer a new land or to lead his warriors to victory. The collective energy of the room would be palpable, a shared sense of purpose and destiny. And then the horn would be passed, and each warrior in turn would add their own boast, their own promise, their own thread to the tapestry of the saga being woven in that hall. Historians still argue whether the sumbel was a purely secular event, focused on social and political matters, or if it had a deeper religious significance. Some scholars believe it was primarily a way to maintain social order and reinforce the power of the chieftain, with the toasts and oaths serving as a form of public contract. Others contend that the ceremony was deeply intertwined with Norse pagan beliefs, with the drinking horn acting as a conduit to the gods and the toasts as a form of prayer or offering. It's a bit like trying to determine if a modern wedding is a legal contract or a religious sacrament. The answer, of course, is that it's both, and the same was likely true of the sumbel. It was a complex, multi-layered event that operated on both a social and a spiritual plane. Now, let's talk about the potential dangers. While these ceremonies were generally about building community, they could also be a breeding ground for conflict. A poorly worded boast, a perceived insult, or a refusal to drink from the horn could have dire consequences. Imagine the awkwardness of being the one person at the party who refuses to do a shot. Now multiply that by 1,000 and add swords. A challenge could be issued, a feud could be ignited, and the night could end in bloodshed. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy and bravado, where a single misstep could be fatal. And if you think that's an exaggeration, the sagas are filled with stories of drinking feasts that turned into brawls, with warriors settling their differences with axes, rather than words. It's a stark reminder that in the Viking Age, even a party could be a life-or-death situation. Another light joke, you know. They say that public speaking is one of the most common fears. But I bet if you gave a Viking the choice between giving a speech and fighting a bear, they'd choose the bear every time. At least with the bear, you know where you stand. With the sumbel, you could accidentally start a war with a misplaced adjective. It's a whole different level of pressure. I can just imagine the Viking equivalent of a Toastmasters club, with warriors practicing their boasts and oaths in secret, trying to get the wording just right. No, that's not boastful enough. Add more dragons. The drinking horn itself was a powerful symbol, often made from the horns of aurochs, the now extinct wild cattle of Europe. They were a connection to the natural world, a symbol of strength and virility. The act of drinking from a horn, rather than a cup or a goblet, was also significant. It required a certain amount of skill and commitment. You couldn't just set it down. You had to hold it, to cradle it, to engage with it. It was a more intimate, more personal way of drinking, a direct connection between the drinker and the drink. And as the horn was passed from person to person, it created a physical link between everyone in the hall, a tangible representation of their shared community. So, As you finally take your turn, you raise the horn to your lips, the cool, smooth surface a stark contrast to the warmth of the mead inside. You speak your boast, your voice clear and steady, and then you drink the sweet, intoxicating liquid, a reward for your courage. You pass the horn to the next person, and as you do, you feel a sense of relief, of accomplishment, of belonging. You have participated in one of the most sacred rituals of the Viking Age, a ceremony that has bound you to your fellow warriors, to your chieftain, and to the gods themselves. And as the night wears on and the horns continue to circulate, you realize that you are no longer just a visitor. You are a part of the saga, a character in the ongoing story of what getting drunk was like in the age of Vikings. After navigating the intricate social dance of the drinking horn ceremony, you might be forgiven for thinking that Viking drinking culture was solely a man's world, a realm of warriors and chieftains, but you'd be missing a crucial, and often overlooked, piece of the puzzle. For in the smoky halls and bustling farmsteads of the Viking Age, women held a surprising amount of power, particularly when it came to the golden liquid that flowed so freely. They weren't just passive participants. They were the master brewers, the keepers of tradition, and in many ways, the silent architects of social cohesion. So, let's raise a horn to the Viking women who brewed, managed, and sometimes even ruled through the power of the pint. Imagine stepping into a Viking longhouse, not during a grand feast, but on an ordinary day. You'd likely find the mistress of the household, a formidable woman with a keen eye and capable hands, overseeing the daily operations, and central to those operations was brewing. While men might have been off raiding or farming, it was the women who were largely responsible for the production of ale and mead. This wasn't a casual chore. It was a skilled craft, passed down from mother to daughter, generation after generation. They understood the nuances of fermentation, the subtle signs of a good batch, and the delicate balance of ingredients. They were the original brewmasters, perfecting their recipes through centuries of trial and error. Long before the term craft beer was even a twinkle in a modern brewer's eye. It's like they had their own secret society of master brewers. Only instead of secret handshakes, they had secret family recipes for the perfect ale. Mainstream historical fact, in Viking society, brewing was primarily a domestic task, and women were largely responsible for the production of ale and mead. For their households, this gave them significant economic and social influence within the family unit and the wider community. Their role as brewers was not just about sustenance. It was a source of status and a vital contribution to the household's wealth and hospitality. A woman's skill in brewing could directly impact her family's reputation and ability to host important guests. One quirky tidbit is that the tools of brewing were often considered part of a woman's dowry or inheritance. Imagine inheriting a prized brewing kettle or a set of ancient fermentation crocks. It speaks volumes about the value placed on these skills and the equipment needed to perform them. It wasn't just about having a nice dress or a few pieces of jewelry. A woman's worth was also measured by her ability to provide for her household, and that included keeping the ale flowing. So, if you were a Viking man looking for a good wife, you weren't just looking for beauty. You were looking for someone who could brew a mean batch of mead. It was a practical consideration, but also a sign of a woman's competence and resourcefulness. It's a bit like marrying someone for their excellent coffee-making skills, but with far higher stakes and more potential for hangovers. Historians still argue whether the economic power derived from brewing translated into broader political influence for Viking women. While their control over household production was undeniable, the extent to which this allowed them to participate in formal political decision-making, such as in the Thing Assembly, is debated. Some scholars suggest that their economic contributions gave them a strong voice and indirect influence, while others argue that formal power structures remained largely passive. It's a bit like trying to figure out if the person who controls the office coffee machine actually runs the company. They certainly have a lot of influence, but do they have the final say? The answer likely varied greatly depending on the individual, woman, her family status, and the specific community she lived in. Beyond the practicalities of brewing, women also played a crucial role in the social rituals surrounding alcohol. They were often the ones who served the drinks at feasts, ensuring that everyone was well supplied, and that the flow of conversation and camaraderie continued uninterrupted. This wasn't just a serving role, it was a position of honor and responsibility. They were the facilitators of social bonding, the ones who ensured that the mead hall remained a place of warmth, hospitality, and good cheer. You might even see them participating in the toasts, offering their own boasts or oaths, their voices, adding to the chorus of the hall. They were not just in the background. They were an integral part of the performance, the unsung heroes of many a Viking feast. Another light joke. You know, they say behind every great man is a great woman. In the Viking Age, it was probably a great woman with a very large brewing kettle, because let's be honest, those long boats weren't going to row themselves, and those raids weren't going to be fought on an empty stomach, or a sober one, for that matter. I bet many a Viking warrior owed his courage, or at least his willingness to charge headfirst into battle, to the potent brews concocted by the women back home. It's the original energy drink, just with more honey and less taurine. The social power of Viking women extended beyond just brewing. They were often the keepers of the keys to the household stores, controlling the family's wealth and resources. This included not just food and drink, but also textiles, tools, and other valuable goods. This control over resources gave them a significant say in household matters and often in wider community affairs. They were managers, economists, and strategists, all rolled into one. And in a society where hospitality was paramount, the ability to provide ample food and drink was a direct reflection of a family's status and generosity. A well-stocked mead hall, thanks to the efforts of its mistress, was a powerful statement of wealth and influence. So, as you observe the Viking women moving through the mead hall, their presence is a quiet but undeniable force. They are the backbone of the community, the ones who ensure that the wheels of daily life and the flow of fermented beverages continue smoothly. They are the unsung heroes of the Viking Age, their contributions often overshadowed by the more dramatic tales of battles and exploration, but without their skill, their dedication, and their tireless efforts, the mead halls would have been silent. The feasts would have been dry, and the sagas might never have been sung. So, next time you hear a tale of Viking glory, remember the women who made it all possible, one delicious, intoxicating brew at a time. Having witnessed the social power of Viking women and the ceremonial gravitas of the drinking horn, you might think you've seen the full spectrum of Viking drinking. But there's a darker, more mysterious side to their relationship with altered states, one that conjures images of terrifying warriors, impervious to pain and consumed by an almost supernatural fury. We're talking, of course, about the berserkers, those legendary figures who charged into battle with a primal roar, seemingly immune to fear and injury. And for centuries, historians have pondered what fueled their terrifying rage. Was it pure adrenaline, a psychological state, or something more chemical? Imagine standing on a battlefield, the air thick with the clash of steel and the cries of men. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the Viking ranks, clad not in armor, but perhaps only in a bearskin or wolfskin. Their eyes are wide, their movements erratic, and a guttural roar tears from their throat. They hack and slash with a ferocity that seems inhuman, shrugging off blows that would fell an ordinary warrior. This is a berserker in full fury, a terrifying force of nature. You might wonder if they've simply had too much mead, but this is clearly something else entirely. This is a state of mind, or perhaps a state of body, that transcends mere intoxication. It's like watching a heavy metal concert where the lead singer has decided to fight the entire audience, and is winning. Mainstream historical fact: were a class of elite Viking warriors, mentioned in Old Norse sagas and historical accounts, who were said to fight in a trance-like frenzied state. Their name, often translated as bearshirts or bear shirts, suggests a connection to animalistic ferocity and a disregard for conventional armor. These warriors were feared by their enemies and revered by their allies, often leading the charge in battle and striking terror into the hearts of their opponents. Their existence is well documented, even if the exact nature of their rage remains a subject of debate. For a long time, one of the most popular theories about the berserk rage involved psychoactive substances, specifically the fly-agaric mushroom Amanita muscaria, with its distinctive red cap and white spots, has often been cited as the culprit. The idea is that these warriors would consume the mushroom, inducing a state of altered consciousness, heightened strength, and a diminished sense of pain and fear. Imagine trying to fight someone who thinks they're a bear and can't feel your sword. It's a compelling narrative, fitting neatly into the mystique of the berserker. However, the effects of fly-agaric are complex and often unpredictable, leading to nausea, disorientation, and even convulsions, which might not be ideal for a coordinated battle charge. It's a bit like trying to win a marathon after downing a bottle of cough syrup. Theoretically possible, but highly inadvisable. One quirky tidbit is that some theories suggest berserkers might have consumed henbane hyoscyamus niger, a plant known for its hallucinogenic and sedative properties. Unlike the stimulating effects often attributed to berserker rage, henbane can cause disorientation, blurred vision, and a feeling of detachment. This could explain the historical accounts of berserkers biting their shields or being impervious to pain. They might have been so out of it that they simply didn't register the pain or the danger. It's a less glamorous explanation than a mushroom-fueled rampage, but perhaps more plausible. Imagine trying to explain to your chieftain why you bit your shield. It just looked so chewable, sir. Historians still argue whether berserker rage was primarily induced by pharmacological means, psychological conditioning, or a combination of both. While the mushroom and henbane theories are popular, concrete archaeological or textual evidence directly linking berserkers to specific psychoactive substances is scarce. Some scholars propose that their trance-like state was a result of intense ritualistic preparation, self-hypnosis, or even a form of dissociative disorder brought on by extreme stress and training. Others suggest that the accounts of their superhuman feats were exaggerated for dramatic effect in sagas, or that their terrifying appearance and behavior were a form of psychological warfare designed to intimidate enemies. It's a bit like trying to figure out if a professional wrestler is genuinely angry or just really good at acting. The truth is probably a complex interplay of factors, making the berserker an enduring enigma. Regardless of the exact cause, the effect was undeniable. Berserkers were a psychological weapon, a living embodiment of the Norse warrior ideal. Their presence on the battlefield was enough to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies, often causing them to break ranks and flee. They were the shock. Troops of the Viking Age, the ones sent in to break enemy lines and create chaos. And while their methods might seem extreme to us, in the brutal world of Viking warfare, any advantage, chemical or psychological, was worth exploring. It's a testament to their ingenuity, or perhaps their desperation, that they sought such radical means to achieve victory. Another light joke, you know. If berserkers were really taking hallucinogenic mushrooms, I bet their battle cries were less about Odin and more about, "Whoa, is that a rainbow-colored dragon?" And imagine the post-battle debriefs. "So, Bjorn, what did you see out there?" "Well, chieftain, the enemy looked like giant squirrels, and I swear their swords were made of spaghetti, probably made for some interesting sagas, if nothing else." So, as you witness the terrifying spectacle of a berserker in full fury, you realize that the Viking relationship with altered states went far beyond mere social drinking. It delved into the realms of ritual, psychology, and perhaps even ancient pharmacology. It was a quest for an edge, a way to transcend human limitations, and become something more, something primal and unstoppable. And as the echoes of their roars fade into the mists of history, the mystery of the berserker remains, a testament to the extreme lengths to which these warriors would go to achieve victory, even if it meant losing themselves in the process. From the communal warmth of the mead hall to the terrifying fury of the berserker, you've seen how deeply ingrained alcohol was in Viking life. But the story of Viking drinking isn't confined to the shores of Scandinavia. These weren't just raiders and farmers. They were also shrewd merchants and their longships. Those iconic vessels of exploration and conquest were also vehicles of commerce. And among the furs, amber, and slaves, they traded liquid gold in the form of wine and other exotic beverages, flowed along their vast and intricate trade routes, connecting the frosty north to the sun-drenched vineyards of the south. So, prepare to set sail, because we're about to explore the surprising role of alcohol in Viking trade. Imagine yourself on a bustling trading post, perhaps in Hiddeby or Birka, those vibrant hubs of Viking commerce. The air is alive with the chatter of different languages, the clatter of goods, and the scent of exotic spices. You see merchants from distant lands, their faces weathered by long journeys, haggling over prices, and among the local furs and iron, you spot something unusual: amphorae, large clay jars filled with wine. This wasn't the everyday ale or mead you've become accustomed to. This was a luxury, a taste of the Mediterranean, brought north by daring Viking traders. It was a status symbol, a drink for the elite, a testament to the far-reaching networks of the Viking world. It's like finding a vintage Bordeaux at your local corner store, unexpected, but definitely a welcome surprise. Mainstream historical fact: the Vikings established extensive trade networks that stretched from North America to the Middle East, exchanging goods such as furs, timber, amber, and slaves for luxury items like silk, silver, and, significantly, wine. While mead and ale were common domestic beverages, wine was primarily an imported luxury, consumed by the wealthy elite and used in high-status social and religious ceremonies. Archaeological finds of wine, amphorae, and glass drinking vessels in Viking settlements confirm the importance of this trade. while the Vikings were adept at brewing their own mead and ale. Wine was a different beast entirely. The climate in Scandinavia wasn't conducive to viticulture, so if you wanted wine, you had to import it. And import it they did, from regions as far south as the Rhineland and France. These wines would have been very different from modern wines, likely unaged, unfiltered, and perhaps even fortified with honey or herbs to help them survive the long journey. Imagine a rough, potent brew, probably closer to a strong cider than a delicate Pinot Noir, but for the Viking elite, it was a taste of sophistication, a connection to the more established, Christianized cultures of continental Europe. It was a way to show off your wealth and your connections, a liquid flex, if you will. One quirky tidbit about this wine trade is that the Vikings weren't just passive consumers. They were active participants in its distribution. They didn't just buy wine, they transported it, often over vast distances, navigating treacherous seas and rivers. This required not only skilled seamanship, but also a sophisticated understanding of logistics and storage. Imagine trying to keep hundreds of liters of wine from spoiling on a long voyage in a wooden longship. It's a testament to their engineering and organizational skills, and perhaps a testament to their thirst. You can almost picture a Viking merchant carefully checking his cargo of wine, making sure none of it had gone sour. After all, a spoiled shipment meant a spoiled profit, and nobody likes a grumpy Viking merchant. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for the Viking wine trade was purely economic, driven by demand for luxury goods, or if it also served as a means of cultural exchange and assimilation. Some scholars suggest that the adoption of wine by the Viking elite was a deliberate act of cultural appropriation, a way to emulate the sophisticated customs of the European courts they encountered. Others argue that it was simply a matter of supply and demand, with wine being a valuable commodity that could be traded for other desirable goods. It's a bit like debating whether you buy a fancy car for its performance or for the status it confers. The truth, as often is the case, is probably a blend of both, with economic incentives and cultural aspirations intertwining to shape their trading practices. So, as you observe the wine being unloaded from a long ship, you realize that these seemingly simple clay jars represent a complex web of connections, a testament to the Viking Age as a period of intense globalization. These were not isolated communities. They were part of a larger world, connected by rivers, seas, and the insatiable human desire for new experiences, new goods, and new tastes. The wine trade, in its own way, was as much a part of the Viking expansion as their raids and settlements. It was a quieter form of conquest, a cultural infiltration through the palate. Another light joke, you know. I bet the first time a Viking tried wine, they were probably like, "What is this weak stuff? Where's the honey? Where's the kick?" And then they probably added some honey and herbs to it, just to give it that authentic Viking punch. Because why have a delicate vintage when you can have a beverage that makes you feel like you can wrestle a bear? It's all about setting expectations, really. The trade in alcoholic beverages wasn't just one way. While the Vikings imported wine, they also likely exported their own mead and ale, though perhaps on a smaller scale. Their unique brewing traditions, particularly their strong, honey-based meads, would have been exotic and desirable in other parts of Europe. Imagine a Frankish nobleman, accustomed to his local wine, being introduced to a potent Viking mead. It would have been a revelation, a taste of the wild, untamed north. This exchange of beverages fostered a deeper understanding and appreciation of different cultures, even amidst the conflicts and raids. It was a liquid diplomacy, a way to bridge divides through shared intoxication. So, as the sun sets over the bustling trading post, and the last amphora of wine is carefully carried away, you reflect on the journey of this liquid gold, from the sun-drenched vineyards of the south to the frosty shores of Scandinavia. It traversed vast distances, connecting disparate cultures and fueling the appetites of a burgeoning. Having navigated the earthly realms of Viking drinking, from the communal alehouses to the terrifying berserker rage, it's time to ascend to the heavens, or perhaps descend to the depths, to witness how even the gods themselves partook in the potent pleasures of fermented beverages. For, in Norse mythology, drinking wasn't just a human pastime. It was a divine activity, a source of wisdom, power, and endless revelry. So, prepare yourself, for we are about to join the ultimate drinking party, where the stakes are cosmic, and the hangovers are legendary. Imagine a magnificent hall, not unlike the mead halls you've already visited, but grander, more shimmering, built of gold and precious stones. This isn't Valhalla just yet, but the underwater hall of the Jotun giant of the sea and his wife Ran. JR is the master brewer of the gods, and his hall is the ultimate destination for divine feasts. You see Odin, wise and one-eyed, sipping from his horn, perhaps contemplating the fate of the cosmos. Thor, ever boisterous, is likely challenging someone to a drinking contest, his thunderous laughter echoing through the hall. Even Loki, the trickster, is probably stirring up mischief, perhaps swapping someone's mead for seawater. It's a scene of epic proportions, where the gods gather, to feast, to plot, and to get spectacularly drunk. It's like the ultimate VIP party, but with more beards and less velvet rope. Mainstream historical fact, Norse mythology is replete with references to gods and other mythical beings engaging in feasting and drinking. Figures like Jaya, the sea giant, are depicted as master brewers and hosts of divine banquets, underscoring the cultural importance of brewing and communal drinking even in the mythological realm. Valhalla, Odin's hall for fallen warriors, is famously described as a place of endless feasting and drinking, where the Einherjar slain warriors prepare for Ragnarok, highlighting the spiritual significance of these activities. One quirky tidbit about these divine drinking sessions is the story of the mead of poetry, which you might remember from our first section. This isn't just any mead. It's brewed from the blood of Kvaser, a being created from the spittle of all the gods, who possessed immense wisdom. Whoever drinks this mead gains the gift of poetry and wisdom. Imagine the pressure. You're at a party, and suddenly someone hands you a drink that could turn you into a literary genius, or, if you spill it, just a regular drunk. It's a far cry from your average beer pong tournament. This mythical beverage highlights the deep connection between intoxication, inspiration, and the sacred in Norse thought. It suggests that getting drunk wasn't just about forgetting your troubles, but about unlocking hidden potential, about tapping into a divine source of creativity. Though, let's be honest, most of us just end up singing karaoke off-key. Historians still argue whether the mythological depictions of divine drinking directly reflect actual Viking drinking practices, or if they represent an idealized, exaggerated version of their feasts. Some scholars suggest that the myths served as a blueprint for human behavior, encouraging lavish hospitality and communal bonding. Others argue that the divine feasts were purely symbolic, representing cosmic order and the cyclical nature of existence, with the drinking serving as a metaphor for the flow of life and knowledge. It's a bit like debating whether superhero movies are a reflection of societal values or just pure escapism. The truth, as always, is probably a blend, with the myths both mirroring and shaping the cultural practices of the time. Now, let's talk about Valhalla, the ultimate destination for Viking warriors who die bravely in battle. This isn't just a spiritual afterlife. It's a perpetual feast, a never-ending party where the Einherjers spend their days fighting and their nights drinking. Imagine waking up every morning, fighting glorious battles, getting killed, being resurrected, and then heading straight to the mead hall for an endless supply of boar meat and mead. It's the ultimate warrior's retirement plan, a place where the drinking never stops and the hangovers are magically cured by morning. It's like an all-inclusive resort, but with more axes and less poolside loungers, and the mead flows freely, served by the Valkyries themselves, those beautiful, fierce maidens who choose the slain. It's a pretty sweet deal, if you ask me. Another light joke, you know, I bet the gods in Valhalla have a strict what happens in Valhalla, stays in Valhalla policy. Because if all those heroic boasts and drunken confessions got out, it would be a PR nightmare for the Norse pantheon. Imagine Odin trying to explain why he challenged a giant to a belching contest after too much mead. Not exactly the dignified all-father image, is it? Though, to be fair, he probably won. The concept of divine drinking contests also appears in Norse mythology, further emphasizing the importance of alcohol in their worldview. Thor, for instance, famously attempts to drain a drinking horn in the hall of Utgarka-Loki, only to discover that the horn is connected to the ocean itself. This tale, while a trick, highlights the idea of drinking as a test of strength and endurance, even for the gods. It's a cosmic version of a college frat party where the biggest, strongest god wins the drinking game. And while Thor might have been tricked, the sheer scale of the challenge underscores the mythological significance of drinking as a heroic endeavor. So, as you witness the gods in their revelry, you realize that the Viking fascination with alcohol wasn't just about earthly pleasures. It was woven into the very fabric of their cosmology, a divine gift, a source of inspiration, and a pathway to the afterlife. The mead hall, whether on earth or in the heavens, was a sacred space, a place where the boundaries between the human and the divine blurred, and where the golden liquid flowed freely, connecting mortals to their gods. And as the echoes of their laughter and boasts fade, you're left with a profound understanding of how deeply ingrained drinking was in the Viking soul. From the smallest farmstead to the grandest halls of Asgard,